Remember that Charlie Kirk letter that we were talking about, that Benjamin Netanyahu said Charlie Kirk wrote him this letter? Well, apparently now this letter has been revealed. Now, I'm going to forewarn you, there's no date on this letter. Just keep that in mind. And I don't know if Charlie Kirk would have dated his letters. I don't know, but there's no date on the letter. Benjamin Netanyahu said he received that letter in May. So there is a portion of time between May and September. What this letter shows you, and we're going to go through it, what this letter shows you is that Charlie Kirk in this letter, if this is the real letter, it shows you that Charlie Kirk was giving Benjamin Netanyahu advice and telling him what was happening with Gen Z on the ground. Now, a lot of Zionists are clapping their hands about it, and they're pointing their fingers at Candace Owens, and they're saying, see, Candace lied, yada, yada. But I think you need to look at this letter in a different way. When we go through it, I think what this letter is really going to show you is it actually kind of points the finger back at Israel, because it shows you that once again, Benjamin Netanyahu was lying about just how involved Israel was in U.S. politics. And I think everybody really needs to see this. And we're talking about pushing propaganda. So let's go there. Let's start with Blakely. Blakely, we love Blakely. Blakely went off about this letter. We'll start with this video and then we'll get to the letter.
See, because the ADL labeling Turning Point USA as a hate group is exactly why it's never going to be good enough. First of all, the ADL is a joke. The ADL is an apartheid defender. They're not a civil rights organization. They're Islamophobic. They're anti-Arab. And then they get on there and they say being a Christian is extremist. They labeled being a Christian as extremist. And now that Turning Point, which was Charlie Kirk's organization, is extremist. So no good deed goes unpunished, bro, because it does not matter how much of a faithful Zionist Charlie Kirk was. In that letter that they just got released, that he wrote to Netanyahu, that letter was not critical at all. That letter was ass-kissing. I love Israel. I am an operative, and I am willing to do anything to help you clean up their image because you're not getting how much you're losing. Like, people acting like, oh, that letter from Charlie Kirk, he really was telling Netanyahu. No, he wasn't. That was a letter of somebody who was like, hey, man, you are messing up and I want to help you. I want to personally help you course correct. He was offering to have his American staff help Netanyahu and then left his personal number. I don't know how much of a bestie that it gets to that. But according to the Apartheid Defense League, that was not good enough. So now TPUSA is also an extremist group. The same ADL, by the way, that lobbied TikTok relentlessly to get this special role created for a hate speech monitor run by a Zionist ex-Israeli army officer. See, because the ADL labeling Turning...
Okay, so yeah, for those who didn't know that, the ADL does label Turning Point USA as one of those extremist organizations. Yeah, they do. So let's look at the letter and I will let you be the judge. Let's get into it. Charlie Kirk's letter to Netanyahu revealed, read in full. So again, as I told you guys, there was no date on this letter, but we're going to go through it ourselves. Of course, you know, they put Candace here because people were calling out Candace Owens. They're saying, no, Candace, you didn't tell the truth about the letter. So let's get into the letter and see it for ourselves. Let me make sure we start right here. From the desk of Charlie Kirk. Dear Prime Minister, one of my greatest joys as a Christian is advocating for Israel and forming alliances with Jews in the fight to protect Judeo-Christian civilization. Most recently, I am proud to have taken over Ambassador Huckabee's show on TBN, where we continually support Israel and the Jewish people. As Mohammedanism spreads in Western societies, it is critical that Jews and Christians stay united in an effort to contain and roll back radical Islam and Sharia law. I regret to report that anti-Israel and anti-Semitic trends are at record levels on social media. These negative sentiments then flow downstream into college campuses and even seep into the conservative MAGA community. So here we go. Again, if this is the letter, this is Charlie Kirk sending a warning to Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, remember, this was May. The podcast where Charlie Kirk appeared on PBD, and then also I think Megyn Kelly, where he was saying, why am I not allowed to criticize Israel? That was after this letter. So people need to look at the timeline. May, September, May, September. A lot can happen in between. Let's continue on. My team and I have spent months analyzing these trends and debating ideas that could help you and your country push back against these disturbing developments. Anti-Israel sentiment can undermine American support for Israel. The purpose of this letter is to lay out our concerns and outline potential remedies. Everything written here is from a place of deep love for Israel and the Jewish people. I think it's important to be brutally honest with those you love. In my opinion, Israel is losing the information war and needs a communications intervention. Now, that part is important because as it stands right now, it has already been announced that some of the individuals that work for the Trump administration are already assigning contracts to flood social media and YouTube with pro-Israel content. To that, I say, whatever, because the reality is this: people can't unsee what they saw. The damage is already done. We already saw what we saw, So putting out all these videos that are pro-Israel doesn't change what people saw. Period. Let's continue on. I started to compose this letter to you on Easter. I should have been focused on my family, but I was getting bombarded with messages about the Israeli army making it difficult for Christians to access church in Jerusalem on Easter. At the time, I did not see any official statements pushing back on this narrative. It was frustrating because pro-Israel surrogates like me should not be in charge of fact-checking every piece of anti-Israel misinformation that pours into social media. It wasn't just Easter. On my recent campus tours, half the questions I get are about Israel, and they're all negative. So I told you that some people on the right were also starting to turn on Israel, having that criticism, calling out the genocide in Gaza. But if this is the real letter, and if Charlie Kirk actually wrote this, according to this letter, it was bigger than I thought. Because he says here, they're all negative. We'll continue on here. I often spend half my time on these campus tours defending Jews in Israel, which I'm proud to do because I love Israel and I love the Jewish faith. I spent endless hours with Dennis Prager over the years studying the Torah. Sometimes it feels like I'm defending Israel in public more than your own government. My experience on college campuses matches a recent Harvard-Harris poll, which reported 48% of 18 to 24-year-old Americans support Hamas over Israel. Even in young MAGA circles, Israel is losing support. We are getting huge crowds of 4,000, 5,000 students on some of my college tours. My campus visits are becoming like a rock concert atmosphere filled with conservative patriots. Yet, on these campus visits, I am constantly confronted with Israel is an apartheid state. Why does Israel conduct ethnic cleansing? Why is America subsidizing Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people? Is American aid helping to subsidize Israel's free health care? Israel and the well, we can't say that here, but you know what I'm saying, running U.S. foreign policy. Israel responsible for September 11th. Defending Israel is not in our U.S. national interest. Why is Israel trying to drag us into a war in the Middle East? Above are just a sampling of the negative Israel Jewish comments and questions I confront on college campuses. I'm accused of being a paid apologist for Israel when I defend her. However, if I don't defend Israel strong enough, I'm accused of being anti-Semitic. Pause. Highlight this right here. So this right here tells you that even in May, if this is the real letter from him, that even in May, he was already addressing the fact that he was being accused of being anti-Semitic. This is before his appearance on Megyn Kelly's show where he says, "Why can't I criticize Israel?" This is before his appearance on the PBD podcast. So you see a lot of people, a lot of the pro-Israel accounts, they're using this letter as a gotcha and saying, "See, we told you so, we told you so." But they're not talking about some of the things I'm talking about, that he was already talking about being accused of being anti-Semitic. I know you have gotten a seven front war. Yeah, he did. But I'm trying to convey to you that Israel is losing support even in conservative circles. This should be a 5-alarm fire. Everybody see this? So he was warning Benjamin Netanyahu back in May that they were losing support. I'm often asked, why is Israel killing so many innocent civilians in Gaza? I know Israel goes to great lengths by dropping flyers and even calling civilians to clear out the areas about to be bombed. I know Israel posts maps showing which areas should be evacuated. I know that Hamas uses civilians as human shields, but 90% of the younger generation get their news from social media and podcasts, and there is very little pushback or fact checking by the Israeli government or pro-Israel supporters in the media, especially social media. Well, no, there was actually a lot of pushback. In fact, during the Biden administration, we watched corporate media run cover for Israel like clockwork. There are several pro-Israel influencers that offer this pushback. It's not that there wasn't a message that offered pushback. It was that the young people woke up and they know you guys are lying. They know you're full of it. They know you're lying. That's what it's really about. I strongly suggest, this is important, Israel not always depend on subcontracting their information war efforts to surrogates in America. Mr. Prime Minister, I urge you to revamp your information warfare strategy from top to bottom. Sometimes the impression is given that Israel thinks everyone hates them, so why care about winning over hearts and minds? If there's any truth to this impression, I urge you to consider that social media and podcasts are where you fight for the hearts and minds of a younger generation. Pause. This letter was supposedly sent in May. Remember, Benjamin Netanyahu went on that podcast tour after May. He went on Officer Tatum's show where Officer Tatum just sat there and said, I went to Israel and, Prime Minister, we were only spit on once. That clown went on PBD podcast. He's been making the rounds. Let's continue on. Here we are here. Obviously, all this negative Israel propaganda on social media easily translates into pro-Hamas, free Palestine sentiment on many college campuses. Here are some unsolicited recommendations from my team. So here's recommendations. You need a rapid response media team. President Trump does this very effectively on social media with his own account and with the White House. The president has strong fighters like Stephen Miller and Caroline Leavitt who battle the press every day. Honestly, I don't even know if you have a press secretary. You are an eloquent defender of Israel, but you need a team of information warriors out there pushing back every day. There's also hundreds of millions of dollars raised by private pro-Israel groups. Some of this money should be directed into creating pro-Israel original homegrown content. Next, promote this content on Israel-operated social media channels and websites. Use some of the funds to start the Israel Truth Network. This is all interesting considering Larry Ellison just bought TikTok, another Zionist, billionaire Zionist. Let's continue on. 2, I strongly recommend putting together a team of pro-Israel experts who can fact check misinformation in real time from Israel. Israel needs to take the lead in this effort. No more dependence on subcontractors. Israel never asked for American troops because Israel does its own fighting. I suggest the same approach for the information war. You lead and people like me will follow and provide supplemental support. If you're open to revamping your communication strategy, my team and I are happy to assist. You need something perhaps like the Israel Truth Network, which can include social media channels and one-stop source of information website where, for example, all negative Israel questions I get can be thoroughly debunked. I would love to refer students to such a website. This website would also be a conduit to groups like Hillel and Jewish educators like Dennis Prager. There can be links to books, podcasts, media personalities, and pro-Israel thought leaders. The website can be a place where Judeo-Christian leaders and groups can share information and form closer alliances, yada, yada. You guys get the point. So here's the thing. None of that matters now because people can't unsee what they already saw. That's the thing. You see, all of it's been 2 years, over two, almost 3. None of that changes anything. When I told you Israel lost the information war, in some instances, they lost corporate media, where there were times where corporate media couldn't even defend them. They lost that a long time ago. So it doesn't matter. All this push that's happening right now, where they signed this contract and they're going to flood social media and flood YouTube, none of that matters. Everybody knows Israel's full of shit. The damage was already done. Like I told you guys before, I don't think that Israel will ever regain the reputation that they had before, which they shouldn't have had before in the first place, because they've been killing people. Goes on to say here, have you considered inviting some of the released hostages to go on a speaking tour in the U.S.? Who would go to this? This could be very effective messaging. These hostages can talk about how Gazan civilians not once offered any empathy or compassion. Who said the hostages were with the civilians? If that were the case, as many times as Israel bombed and killed civilians, Hamas would have been gone. Goes on to talk about the lack of humanity, yada, yada. So he says hostages should go on a tour, interview regular Israelis on the streets, asking them what they love about their country. Too late. Abby Martin did this exact same thing many years ago with her documentary. And that's when I realized just how racist Israel was. So all of this is advice allegedly coming from Charlie Kirk in this letter. Goes on to say here, let Israeli explain in their own words how Israel is a pluralistic society, a free country with elected leaders. Yeah, nobody cares about that. It's just like that's the thing. No one cares. All we know is that you killing babies, you guys are racist, right? He brings up Iran. Israel could do a better job explaining the Iranian threat. Among many conservatives who support Israel, there is a concern that America could become entangled in a quagmire in Iran. My generation grew up with the disasters of Afghanistan and Iraq. We were promised there were no WMDs in Iraq, which proved to be a lie. Our generation was also lied to by the governments of Israel and the U.S. about the pandemic. Israeli intelligence missed the boat on October 7th, but were asked to trust Israeli intelligence 100% that Iran is on the cusp of obtaining nuclear weapons. Young conservatives are very skeptical of government proclamations. We don't fully trust intelligence assessments. Right now, it seems like Israel is primarily relying on Americans to make the case for attacking Iranian nuclear sites. These arguments get a lot of blowback in MAGA circles. So he goes on to talk about Iran. He said there needs to be a shift in how Israel presents itself to the world, especially social media. Perhaps the best way to convey my thoughts here is to think of Israel as a political candidate, in this case, a younger woman who grew up on social media. Who is this candidate and what do they stand for? Right now, there is not a one-stop shopping resource where younger people can learn about this candidate. So again, it's interesting. These recommendations, like I said, none of this really matters. It's too late. None of this really matters. I want to show you this part here let me go to the bottom, the very bottom right here. Israel has enormous capabilities, such as how you orchestrated your beeper bomb operation. Perhaps Israel can use some of that same ingenuity to more effectively fight the information war in the media, especially on social media. See, he keeps talking about social media, right? Goes on to say here, let me highlight this. This is the part. Israel is getting crushed on social media, and you are losing younger generations of Americans, even among MAGA conservatives. In my opinion, you are losing the information war, which will eventually translate into less political and military support from America. The Holy Land is so important to my life, and it pains me to see support for Israel slip away. Feel free to contact me on my private number below if you'd like to discuss further. And so they redacted the phone number, and I'm assuming they redacted the signature because the first one that I saw had a signature. So now that's if that's the actual letter. We don't really know. That's something I want people to keep in mind. We really don't know. There's no date on that letter. Let's look at the timing of some of these things. But there are many people right now that I saw on social media that are calling out and are really upset with Candace Owens because they're saying what you said about the letter wasn't true. But I'll tell you something else that I think this letter reveals. Pull this up here. Shout out to Chris for this one, Chris Minahan. Charlie Kirk literally described himself as a surrogate for Israel in his letter to Netanyahu. He was getting secret Hasbara coaching on a near daily basis from Israeli agents up until the night before his death and sending the intel he gathered on his tours to Israel's prime minister. This is not the gotcha Zionists think it is. So this is kind of what I took away from this, right? What I kind of took away from this was that this is more revealing of Israel, because what this letter shows you, for him to say he was a surrogate for Israel, that doesn't make Israel look better. I don't understand why pro-Israel accounts and Zionists are looking at this as a win. He mentions not once, but twice, as I noticed in this letter, that he was a surrogate for Israel. That's not a good thing to be mentioned about Israel, that you had an American podcaster who was basically a surrogate for another country that's killing all these kids. So maybe me and Chris Minahan looked at this differently, but I didn't see this as a win for Israel. And there's more. Show you this part here, also from Chris Minahan. Israeli agent Rabbi Wolicki, who gave Charlie Kirk Hasbara coaching just hours before his death, said Kirk wanted someone from Israel he could talk to confidentially. So listen to this, and I'm going to tell you what I think.
These people got in touch with me about 6-7 months ago. We had already met previously, and we knew who each other were. I mean, obviously, I knew who he was. He knew who I was, and I was friends with a lot of people around him, and that's why he was comfortable. And he reached out to me. One day I get a text message that Charlie's added me to his WhatsApp, and we started chatting, and we would talk about Israel issues. And if he had questions, and he had criticisms for Israel, he wanted someone that confidentially he could talk to about these things and seek information. Of course, he was certainly having conversations with people who were on the other side of these things, and far be it for me to tell Charlie what to think, but I was in regular, basically daily communication with him about this. And then you mentioned the meeting that we had right before his passing, and this was very jarring in retrospect. So Charlie, when he would go out to these campus tours, we've all seen the clips, the viral clips of him debating students, and that's what people know. But unless you've been to the full events or multiple full events, most people don't realize that a large percentage of the questions that Charlie would get on campuses were about Israel.
Wow.
And they were about Israel because our campuses have become hotbeds of anti-Israel hostility. And Charlie was known as someone who defended Israel, who was supportive of Israel, although, again, with his criticisms. And Charlie wanted to speak with me. And Josh Hammer was also on the call. There were other people. You know Josh.
Yeah.
There were a couple of us. It was a small meeting. And Charlie wanted to meet with us to go over the issues that he anticipated he would be asked about Israel and hear what our thoughts were. Again, we weren't telling him what to say, and he wasn't necessarily accepting every argument we made. That's fine.
You're just giving wise counsel.
Charlie wanted to talk to people who are in the know, who understand the issues, and I'm based in Israel, so he knew that, and we knew each other. So that was what the conversation was about.
We were just having a conversation, guys. So let me ask you guys a question, okay? If that letter is indeed from Charlie Kirk, and as it's pointed out in the letter, he was a surrogate for Israel, then what the hell is Ben Shapiro? Hello? Anybody home? If that is true, and Charlie Kirk is a surrogate for Israel, was a surrogate for Israel, what is Ben Shapiro? Everybody think about that for a second. Now, also in that case, he should have had to register with FARA. What is really going on? This is why I said that letter isn't good for either party. That letter isn't good for, if that's the real letter, that letter isn't good for Charlie Kirk because that'll make him look good. And that letter isn't good for Israel either. That'll make y'all look good. So the number of times that Benjamin Netanyahu says, oh, we don't do anything. We don't tell Americans to do anything. We don't say anything to Donald Trump. He's his own person. We haven't told anybody anything. Imagine if there was an American podcaster, and that American podcaster was getting advice and tips from another foreign leader, let's say like China, any other foreign leader. How do you think the US government would feel about that? These are just things to think about. I want you guys to think about, think outside the box. Don't just, a lot of people covering this, like the pro-Israel counts, they're just talking about the letter and like, ooh, Candace was wrong. She was wrong about the letter. And I'm sitting back and I'm thinking, first of all, is this letter real? Two, let's say it is real. And I'm reading the letter and I'm like, I'm reading the same letter that they're reading and they don't see the problem with this letter. Israel is deeply, deeply entrenched in American politics. And regardless of what Netanyahu says, he's a freaking liar. I talked about it earlier. This so-called peace deal that Donald Trump started, it's not a real peace deal. Benjamin Netanyahu already retracted his agreement. Benjamin Netanyahu already marked up the document after he agreed to it publicly. And then two, the fact that Donald Trump says he was appointing someone like Tony Blair, a crazy ass war criminal from the Iraq War, which many of us remember, appointing him to the board of peace over Gaza. That wasn't no peace deal. That was a joke. And basically what you have is Donald Trump and Netanyahu are playing the American people just like Biden and Netanyahu played the American people. When Biden wanted people to believe that they were pushing for a ceasefire, then it was revealed later on, which some of us knew this, but it was revealed later on that there was never one time that they asked them to stop firing the bombs. It's a game. And what they don't want to do is come forward and say, yeah, we don't really care about the Palestinian people. We want Israel to just take over everything. And that's a little too obvious, right? Then you really look like an asshole. A little too much. So they're not going to say that, but that is the case. This is something Kamala knew. This is something Biden knew. And this is something that Trump knows. And Benjamin Netanyahu knows it as well. They're all in on it. So they can try to flood as much social media as they want to. It doesn't matter. We know what we saw. We know who you are. And we know what you've done. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.